Welcome to the If You Could See Me podcast. Thank you for joining the movement. I'm your host, Erin Mahone. I'm an author, storyteller, facilitator, and mental health professional. I like to talk about big things, ask difficult questions, and challenge the ways in which we perceive ourselves, one another, and what's possible in the world. On this podcast, I speak to thinkers, makers, feelers, and folks fighting for change. You'll experience entertaining, thought-provoking conversations with people from all walks of life. I believe that mental health is health, and it goes so far beyond conversations about illness, medications, and treatment. Our mental health is essential to living our best lives, and I want to live in a world in which we talk about emotional wellness as easily and frequently as talking about the common cold. We aren't there yet, but I believe we can be. When I set out to create this thing, I had no idea what I was doing. Just that I wanted to share my story and I hoped I wasn't alone. I've discovered that so many people need to find solidarity. They need to know they aren't alone. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. We can have these difficult conversations in the light of day. We can laugh, joke, and get serious about making change. I've tried to create multiple entry points within this movement, and I hope you will take some time to check out all of our resources and consider sharing your story on our website, ifyoucouldseeme.com. There you can submit your story, find mental health resources, submit ideas or resources yourself, read the stories of other brave warriors, find out about future live events, and invite me to speak or give a workshop in your area. If you're inspired by what we're doing, I hope you'll consider helping out by visiting our Patreon page, patreon.com/ifyoucouldseeme, purchasing my book, rating and reviewing this podcast on iTunes to help people find us, or just send me a message to let me know how this project is impacting you, ways we can improve, and future podcast or blog topics. This was only an idea until amazing people like you joined me in bringing it to life. Enjoy the show. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends and family. Welcome to another episode of the If You Could See Me podcast. I am Erin Mahone, your host and fellow journeywoman on the path of life. I am so excited to welcome today our guest, Miss Leah Lamb. Leah is a storyteller and an educator and a magnificent woman who I met many, many years ago, and our paths diverged. And then over the past couple of months, she came back into my life, I think, without even really knowing it, and has been very inspiring on this part of my new part of this journey with the If You Could See Me project. And I just really wanted to have Leah here today to talk about stories and how they've impacted her life, and how, what drew her to, be a part of this world. So Leah, thank you so much for being here with us today. Can you start by sort of telling us a little bit about who little Leah was and where she came from, and what was the first thing that drew you to storytelling, your first love?
Well, first of all, hi, Erin, and thank you so much for having me into this conversation today. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and so I'm so grateful that our worlds have reintertwined like a good spider web of storyteller. The archetype of the storyteller is the web. It was a spider. That makes good sense that we're in a thick, complicated web that reweaves. My story, gosh, my dad was a veterinarian and my mom was a painter, and they conceived me while they were traveling in Africa, and they were part of the Back to the Land movement. They were from New York City, and we ended up, they came back to the United States as I beckoned them back, my presence beckoned them back, and they decided to move to Vermont, and they ended up on this big 40-acre farm, but it was, as they say, like a gentleman's farm. And I had a lot of time to wander in the wilds, of our open land. This was back before people were afraid to let their children out of their sight.
Right.
And, I think at a really young age, I discovered the companionship of the land, and I discovered the companionship of trees and of rocks and of bones and of animals. And because I was an only child, I also just really got this extraordinary freedom to be with myself and to be with my imagination and to be in a state of deep listening. And I think from that place, I just fell in love with stories. And it sounds kind of weird because I could tell you, like, it could sound like a really depressing story. I was all alone and all I had was stories to save me.
It didn't sound depressing to me at all. It sounded amazing. I was like, oh.
Yeah. And they're both there, it's like they're both there. And I think that as I evolved, my parents got divorced. And so I ended up moving a lot. And so I was always the new kid in school right up until I was in high school. I almost moved every year. And so it's like, it sucks to be the new kid in school all the time. And books saved me, it's like they gave me an escape from the cruelty of kids and the loneliness of being a new kid. And they let me into this whole other world that I loved. And so I always feel like John Steinbeck was my second father, because I just read all of his books when I was young, and it really gave me this beautiful orientation to the world.
It reminds me, you're talking and I'm thinking of, Elizabeth Gilbert's stories in Big Magic about how, her growing up and, being so connected to the land and the environment in which she was raised, and the stories obviously that come from the late Mary Oliver, and how so many prolific authors of our time and before have been so connected to nature and had their sort of love of observation and that capacity to kind of see and weave those ideas and those stories just come from being alone in the woods. It just gives me a sense of peace. I grew up in the suburbs and very much in the same, my parents were divorced and we moved a lot and we went back and forth, but I didn't have that connection to nature. And so, how did that loneliness, impact the way that you thought about who you were and what you could be in the world? What was possible?
Yeah, it's interesting because I never thought of it as loneliness. It was never the scarcity of, it was the generosity of. I think that I'll never forget being in high school and, I was with a friend, she knew that she was going to be a photographer. And I knew at the time it was acting and writing, and I knew that was my path. I just knew it from a very young age. And I remember thinking, wow, we knew somehow, some part of us knew that we were really lucky to know a passion path that young in age. And I think that's just, it's, we all have our, I think it's like when we have an opportunity to listen, it presents, and if we not only have the opportunity to listen, but if we are gifted with generous listeners in our lives, especially as young people, if the people around us are generous enough and they're listening for us. I always say, it's like, we talk about this with stories too. It's like, you don't always listen to a story, especially when it's a new story that's being told. We often listen for a story. And I think the same, I think of that as with teenagers, it's like, we're young people, we listen for them. And I feel like I had, my parents were very generous in their listening and discovered and really supported me getting into acting, supported my writing, and always told me I could. And it was, as I'm older, I really understand how unusual that was and what a gift that was, because I always thought that I could, because the people around me kept encouraging me. They really did. My friends encouraged me and they asked me for my stories. And I think that when the people around us see our gifts and then make requests of them, it invites them to flourish in the world. So it's like, definitely we're products of our environment. Or at least I am. I shouldn't say the we, but I have definitely been a product of my environment.
No, I definitely hear that. I, grew up a singer and a performer and a writer too, but definitely considered myself to be a singer and an actor. And we have very similar, backgrounds, you and I. And
Yay!
I had so much support and so much love from my family. Like they said, you're talented, you should go and be a part of the world, and we want you to share these gifts with the world. And I, on the other hand, and I do write about this in my book sometimes it felt like a burden to have it, because there was a lot of pressure around it. It felt like it was something that I had to do, as opposed to something that I had the opportunity to do. And so, I definitely grappled with that in my young life, feeling like the universe had given me something that I wasn't sure if it was too heavy for me to carry or handle the weight of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's I think where I went with that, and it's definitely felt like a charge, like you've got something to do, now
Right.
go do it, if I'm really, really honest about where my personal challenge was, it was really in the truly getting out of the story in our culture that artists aren't truly valuable.
Yes.
I think for a lot of years, I really had to prove myself to myself and to others, it's like I've been working in community organizing, and I'm working in social justice, and all of that is truly in me. But there was some part in me that couldn't fully surrender into the absolute joy of what I do as a storyteller and the gift that it is, and the more I see it and the more I understand it and the more I truly give it and the more I receive and hear from people, it's like it is just as valuable as doing activism or social justice. I mean, to me now, it is a form, an absolute covert form of activism and social justice work.
Yes.
And liberating work. But it was really escaping that societal story that still wants to crush the spirit of the creator in our culture by devaluing artists. And when people really understand.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, when people really understand that we're all creators, and when you really stand in the potency of your creation energy, that really potent life force energy, and then you start coming into your relationship as having authorship, an authority. Only those words are connected. If you look at the etymology of them, of your own life, through the way that you live it and through what you create in your life, it's like you can come at this in the super new agey, language, or you can come at it from the most ancient understanding of that we create. Every ancient religion agreed that that humans have this unique place in the universe where the world is sung, spoken, or chanted into existence. We speak our reality into being. Abracadabra. I create what I speak, and we live in a society that it benefits and profits off of us consuming, which is really giving our life force energy away, And so it's, so I really had to battle that. I really hear you saying that it's like you have the pressure of it, and what is the pressure of it? Needing to look a certain way, or, whatever that felt like for you. And like, is it good enough or whatever? And mine was like, I have the same good enough story, just coming through slightly different channel.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you said so much there that, the idea that you have to do this in a certain way, you have to share your gifts, excuse me, with the world in a specific way. And every time I endeavored to do that in the right way, quote unquote, the way that you're supposed to be an actor and a singer and all of those things, it never felt authentic for me. And I didn't see, and I know that this is true for a lot of sort of aspiring creators, although today young people grow up in a world that, everything seems possible because they see people doing it in all forms and fashions. Growing up as a child in the 80s and 90s, you didn't see people using their art in a different way. You didn't see people using their voice in a different way. I did not have the benefit of having extremely cultured people in my world. So, they were not exposing me to various forms of art and expression. And so, I genuinely had to come to it on my own. And now in this space, I'm sort of always standing on top of on the mountaintop screaming, you get to do this however it feels right to you. You can tell your story however you are called to tell it. It belongs to you, and you don't have to follow anyone else's rules, and you don't have to follow someone else's timeline. And just sort of, as you said, giving the permission, giving the, not that I have the right to give anyone permission to do anything, but in giving myself the permission to pursue my creative self outside of the box has opened up, the door for other people to kind of walk through it as well.
And I think that's one of the most amazing things. It's like when your live light is on, when your soul is alive and sparked, it sparks life in others.
Right.
And it's that big magic.
So when you decided to, pursue storytelling and began teaching, and, what was your sort of thought? What was the plan, or was there a plan? I find that I don't often have plans. I just sort of show up to things, and however they, unfold in front of me, I just sort of follow them. What was your thinking as far as, I'm going to do this now, and this is how I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I'm definitely on the listener's path, and I really receive a lot from that, like kind of deep listening place, combined with like, what's my intention,
Right.
And, I've been working on a novel for a bit called The Whale Dreamer. And really, a couple of years ago, I came into this place of just deep angst within my beingness, where my whole beingness was saying, Leah, it's time to put 2 feet on your own path as storyteller, and as a creator and as a writer and in this way. And at that point, I was still consulting. I did communications consulting for amazing environmental organizations and helping them develop their strategy. And it was really good work. But my energies were literally being pulled in very different ways. And creation energy is very different than strategy, like campaign strategy energy.
Yes. And
I love that part of my brain that can do it. So it was like, I still enjoyed doing it, and I wanted that knowledge to be put to good use. But it's like the storyteller part in me was just like, I need all of you now. And I was like, well, that's great, but how do you make money as a storyteller, and as a writer? And I, was living in the Bay Area, and for better or for worse, I'm just going to be totally transparent with you. It's like, I didn't think like an artist. I was living in the Bay Area where it was like, tech is what rules, entrepreneurship is what rules that culture. And so I started like just thinking like an entrepreneur, for better or for worse, because I really am an artist first. And I thought, well, the first class came through really in a prayer. It was Myth, Magic, and Medicine Storytelling for New Paradigm. And I wrote it down in meditation, and I was like, it was such a big directive that I don't think I went back and meditated for a month, because I was like, oh my God, if that's going to be like, if I'm going to get these huge assignments every time, I don't know, and so I think I felt the charge. I felt the responsibility. I was like, that was no small task. And it was a gift. It was a real gift, because I all of a sudden understood and saw the progression of what that is, and so it's now become the foundation for what I teach. So my first course that I taught was Myth, Magic, and Medicine, which is really about how do you understand your myths? How do you get to look at your world and understand that it's completely created out of stories? And how do you understand that you are either creating a story or you're living a part in someone else's story. And then how do you find your, become into a real conscious relationship to what roles you're playing, and then perhaps change the role if that's what you want to do. And then understanding yourself as a magician, how do you understand and develop your relationship with yourself as a creator and the creative life force and the muse, whether you call that spirit or the universe or your ancestors. We all have different ways into being in relationship to that collaborative process. And that, again, I feel like that's where the magic is, when you can start to shift and transform and create stories. And then medicine. And this is one of the key pieces where, in storytelling, right now I live in a society where a lot of people have not been seen or witnessed. And so I would say that because of that, and one of the symptoms of that is this intense narcissism. Like, people desperately need to be heard. They desperately need to see. They're seeing themselves first, and we have misplaced our remembrance of what it is to be in a culture of generosity. Not everybody. I want to be very careful because I don't want to say we, because that's a dangerous word.
Right.
Well, actually, it's an important piece because it's a teaching that I've received from Stephen Jenkinson, and I really try to put it to practice. That when we speak for we, it's like, no, we're not actually all coming from the same perspective,
right? Exactly.
Or culture or religion or whatever, and we're not all the same place. So it's like I try to catch myself. Some people, a lot of people. So in that way, it's like that medicine piece is that coming back into the understanding that we have something, I just said it again, but, I'll speak for myself. I have something to give. I actually think everybody has something to give. We inherently have these gifts that we're born with. But we don't all grow up in a culture and society that asks for those or expects for them to be given. And so one of the work I feel like of stepping into what is a sacred story is a story that has a life that supports life on this earth, and with that, how do you give the gift of your beingness to the stories that you tell, so that it's lighting people up, it's giving people energy, it's connecting people, it's creating a unifying force. And that, to me, it's like when we come into story in that way, it's very different than me getting on the stage and acting like a vampire because I've got a hungry ghost in me that's never been seen or never been recognized, and I just desperately need your attention. And that happens so much, and people don't see it or feel it or don't have the skills to recognize it. And what are you giving your energy to? So that's the basis for that course, and I've done that. That I'm actually about. It starts again in April, a 4-week class online. And then from there, I went into teaching more bigger classes. So I also now teach Speak the Spark, Sacred Storytelling for New Paradigm. And that is where I bring in guest teachers, because I really felt this piece of like, wow, we need eldership at our time. And like, we need to hear the voices of our elders, and our elders aren't always on this wild platform of the internet. And how could I be a conduit to really building a good, strong community of people who are committed and want to experience the world in this way, and then also want to be in a learning community and want to be exposure to like people that they'd never normally ever get exposure to, and so that's been just like a radical form of joy and pleasure is cultivating that community and bringing these amazing teachers to people, and then going on this like longer journey of being in a relationship to our personal stories, the old stories, and dare I say, what new stories are asking to be midwifed into the times that we're living in.
I could just listen to you talk forever about all of this. It's just, it's just, who have been your teachers? You were not born in the world talking like this about stories. So who have you learned from that has sort of given you this, this incredible perspective on what can be accomplished through this work?
Yeah, it's an absolute alchemy. Part of it is like Carolyn Casey. Oh my God, listen to that woman talk and you will think of language and storytelling in a whole nother way. Martin Shaw showed me the connection between story and wilderness. I thought that, I worked as a wilderness guide for 7 years. I had this real love of that place, and I had this love of story. and I hadn't been able to connect the dots. And he absolutely woke that up and showed me the path of their marriage and the emergence of the two and the connection. I would say that Michael Mead is, it's like he started talking story with his drum, and then he asked the audience to see themselves in the story. He talks about using mythic stories, myths as oracles for seeing, your own consciousness. And I would, like, he just totally turned me on. So I do a form of mystical storytelling called soul stories, where we work with the stories in that way, where we talk back to them. And, that form of storytelling and my understanding of what a story is and having a soul and having a life, a lot of my unique perspective of story has come from like just being in relationship with stories, of having them work me over time. It's like, I feel like I worked as a storyteller and as a writer for years and years and years, not knowing that I was writing medicine stories. It wasn't until like the last couple of years that I was like, oh my God, I wrote a medicine story for myself. I didn't know, because like I wrote it 10 years ago.
Right.
And then when I went back to look at it, I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I was writing myself into my future. I had no idea. So some of it comes from like, just like following that impulse of like, where is the aliveness and what is calling and how do you respond to that? And then the patience of knowing that if you're on a path, you can't always understand it, completely when you're in the middle of it. You really need some perspective and some age. It's like, I feel like so much, it's like in the 20s, I gotta do something. In my 30s, I gotta mean something. In my 40s, I'm like, oh my God, it didn't make sense.
I can just be. What is this?
Well, I had context, more context and understanding. Well, so it's a combination of those teachers, Stephen Jenkinson, obviously Clarissa Piccola essay is just what she's done and put into our collective consciousness of story. Leslie Mormon Silko, her book Ceremony and Storyteller. Yeah, lots of great people out there right now.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all of those people and ways in which our audience can find them in the show notes for the show, in case people want to go down the rabbit hole of great story workers. Is there ever a time in your life? I do a lot of this sort of work about allowing and about working with resistance. And is there ever a time in this work when you feel like you're not allowed, or when that voice in your head says you can't do this, you don't have the right, or you don't have the, have you ever had that experience with that voice of resistance?
No, never.
I'm
just kidding.
I'm like,
no,
what
totally
are you?
kidding.
Some sort of like strange, oh my God.
No. The inner critic? Yeah, no, my inner critic has a script. And so actually I really love people this is a great exercise for anyone to do this, because my inner critic has a script. It likes to tell me that I'm definitely not smart enough.
Yeah.
That I don't know enough, which I think that a lot of women, there's that research that said like men need to know like, 5% of something, and they feel like they can like talk about it with authority and teach about it. Women need to know like 95% about something before they feel like they can talk about it and teach about it. My critic, I really like to listen to my critic, because that way I can catch it versus and understand that it has a role, it has an archetypal energy in my beingness that is both a shadow and a light. So my critic likes to tell me that I'm not smart enough. She likes to tell me that I haven't studied enough, that I should learn more from other people. My critic, it's just like the whole not enough story. I think you said it. And so what I like to do is when I'm working with a critic, is write it down the script, especially if it's in the way of me doing something. Like if it's actually put a barrier between me and doing something, it's like there's a difference between creative inspiration that takes you in another direction and resistance. And resistance is not to be trusted unless there's no energy, but that's something else, but it's like, so when the critic's in the way, where I can't do something because the critic is there, then I like to write down the script, because that's what it is. And it goes on repeat, there's someone better. There's someone out there better than you, Well, if there's someone better, then why should I waste my time? It's like, well, come on. Nobody can do it like you. And each person has their unique resonance. So it's like, so with that, I like to write it out. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's just my critic script. It's not truth. It's not the only thing that's in the field. It's just like, that's what my critic likes to do. And so there's shame involved, and there's all of that. But then I also like to look at what's the gift in the critic. Well, because it's like, well, the critic on one side of the coin is a total nightmare and could like stop the show. On the other side, if you look at the light of the critic, it's like, it just wants me to be my absolute best. You know, it's actually out for, you know, but if I have to really be very, very disciplined in it. So I'd be like, oh, you know, you're right. I love to learn. And I do want to know more. Thanks for that reminder, you know. And by the way, I have access to, you know, all of those people who have scholarship, you know, it's like they received it, and it's a combination of learning from those who have gone further, you know, that are further down the path. And then there's also, it's like this marriage of, and then what I have access to wisdom and knowledge too. That I have a responsibility to that. You know, so when I teach, it's really important to me to, oops, you okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sitting in my car, and the Bluetooth just picked up the connection. So hang on one second.
Okay.
All of a sudden, you were very loud
in my ear. Holy Moses! All right. Well, that will be a fun little. That will either be a fun little edit, or we will leave it in and laugh about it. I'll decide later.
Part of it.
That's part of this.
How do you stay alive with the story as it's unfolding?
Exactly. I apologize. Please continue when you teach.
Yeah. So, you know, I feel like it's really important to acknowledge where you learn. I really appreciate you asked that question. It's like, who inspired you? Where, you know, where did you learn? And when I teach, it's really important. Like when I share the concepts from, you know, like for example, that piece with Stephen Jenkinson, that was such a clear teaching that he really gave to me, you know. And so I like to name him when I share that, because that's his teaching. It isn't authentic. That did not originate in me. You know, a lot of what I teach did originate in me, so I just speak it from that place. But when I'm passing along knowledge that I have accumulated from other people, I speak them into the field, and it's like, and that makes our field that much stronger. Exactly. You know, it's like it claims your place in the lineage. People, it's like there's a weird thievery. It's like, I have to be the origin or the creator of this information. Well, it's not going to bring the same kind of power and resonance, you know. And it's like you're going to end up sounding like a fake. I'm sorry, you know. So a lot of times people will come to me and they're like, can I share what you teach? I'm like, oh my gosh, please, it's meant to be given. And thank you for like sharing and naming the lineage from which you come, because it also strengthens the lineage from which I come. And yeah, it's just all good stuff.
Well, it just, you know, I mean, it's so true. We don't exist in a vacuum. We weren't born in a vacuum. We don't, you know, we learn from the people who are in our lives. And, you know, one of the, I talk a lot about Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, because for me, the way he talks about resistance and inspiration, resistance in particular, helped me discover what's true, and that is that the voice of resistance is lying. It's not a real thing. It's something that I can talk back to. It is not true that I'm not good enough. That is the voice of resistance telling me all of those things, but it is actually something that I can claim agency over. It's not, I don't have to believe those voices. And I think that you know, certainly self-doubt has played a lot of role in my own creative path, and you know, in discovering that information in a way that really resonated with me. Now, I mean, it's part of a lot of what I teach is, you know, I explain resistance and inspiration in the way that he explains it, and I fully credit him because it changed my life. And it was the function of listening to a book while I was on vacation with my family. It was not the function of having to study, you know, for 100 years in an institution of higher learning in order to obtain that knowledge and that wisdom. It was something that, you know, I accessed where I was at the time in which I, you know, existed. And, you know, I love the idea that we are all equipped with whatever it is that we need in order to get where we want to go, because we have the ability to acquire new knowledge and new skills and new, you have the ability to say, I want to know more. And therefore you have access to, what is in front of you. Not everyone, not all the time, not, certainly there are circumstances that limit that access, but for the most part, we can all ask for what we need, as far as knowledge is concerned.
Yeah, and I think like being able to also take that energy, it's like, I think of it like I'm a toddler. It's like, if you try to resist a toddler that wants your attention, you're going to get a temper tantrum, right? It's just going to get louder and louder until it gets your attention. And if you just can stop for a moment and see what it needs and be with it and play with it, then all of a sudden there's like a little more peace and ease in the field. And it's like, I think the same thing with, I like your naming of it, resistance, or the critic, where you say, okay, you're asking for my attention. Great, you've got 2 minutes. It's like, no, you don't get to take an hour, and that's why it's like, and then you listen to it and you talk back to it. And I love sometimes drawing it. Sometimes I'll tell people just to draw it, and to be kind of fierce with it. It's like, you don't run the show. You've got your 2 minutes. I'll hear you out, and now we're done.
Right. Exactly. Thank you for, your role in trying to protect me and keep me safe, and all the things that you are, from an evolutionary perspective, you are here for this purpose. And for, my own personal and emotional evolution, I have to put you in your place, and learning that I had a right to do that. In the course of my own creative experience was truly life altering. So as we sort of get to the end of our conversation, I would love to hear your, what I hear from people is that the creating the space to really connect with their own stories for the folks that I work with is really sort of life changing. And it makes me a little uncomfortable, because I don't want to say I'm in charge of that, but because I consider what I do is just, creating a safe and comfortable space in which to mine and ask those big questions and be present with those things that we as a commodified human race are not often encouraged to do in our culture. What has been your experience with your students and the people that you work with, and sort of seeing them to be able to, look at their lives and their experiences and what's possible for them in a different way throughout the process of your work and your work with them?
And I want to make sure I understand your question. So you're talking about, like, in terms of, like, how do they find their stories, or what's the daily discipline, or like, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I fully understand your question.
It's okay. It was a lot of words. Ultimately the shift that happens, the emotional shift that happens, the change for them in the process of doing all of this.
There's this one woman, Alana, who I adore her. She's a teacher of teachers, and she was like, she's in my advanced performance class right now, and last time she was like, "Speak the Spark is a way of life." She was like, "I'm going to keep taking it every year," and I was just like so humbled, when she said that. And what I see is that when you commit to a creative process, and then you get to do it in community, it's just fun, And then when you commit to also seeing your eyes through the lens of creation and understanding that you have the capacity to bring meaning. This is what humans do, right? This is the difference between facts and information. We live in the era of information, and as humans, our bodies aren't made to metabolize that. We are storing animals. So we need to bring meaning to the information so that we understand how to live within the story. And I see that coming alive in a lot of people. And so I've seen people, I've seen people start podcasts. I've seen people who work as like climate leaders, bring fairy tales into their work. I've seen people just feel very alive and enlivened in all parts of their life, because once you turn on and commit to that creative channel, you know, through second chakra, through life force energy, you know, and it affects all parts of your life. Yeah, and I've just seen all different kinds of, and people being able to be alive in their story, you know, in a different way, and realize, you know, there's so many different ways to look at every single circumstance and situation. And if you get stuck in the 1D, 2D way, you know, like health being, you know, one of the greatest myths of our time, you know, that if we don't have perfect health, you know, that sickness is a bad thing, you know. Well, our bodies are these extraordinary things that we can barely understand. And they're connected to our soul, and they're connected to our learning. And, you know, one of the women that has taken several of my courses is an MD doctor. And, you know, her voice stays in my head where she says, you know, it's like, she's like, well, people want me to make them better, but I might feel like my true job is to allow them to feel okay and to learn from what their body is trying to communicate to them, you know. And right then and there, that just sheer slight orientation of looking at life can be so different, you know, where you're not afraid of what your body is doing, but you're like, oh, what is my body trying to speak to me in this moment? And that could be with everything, you know, every single part of your life. I think that's when you start to engage and understand that you are part of bringing meaning to the story that you tell to yourself, about yourself, and to the world around you. If there's anything I've learned personally, you know, and as, you know, as the woman that, you know, had a lot of insecurities, and I would share them. I felt like if I could just speak my insecurities, then nobody could accuse me of them. You know, it was a very funny backward thinking.
Right?
You know, I see myself as being bad first, you know. But the funny thing is that people believe us, you know, and then I'd have to be like, oh, I wasn't really that. I was just like wanting to speak it so that I wouldn't have to be that. Then people would see me as that, and I'm like, oh man, you know. So I think that kind of reclaiming your life and the way that you live it through the power of your language, I think that's one of the things that I've gotten to live my own self, and also just see in the people around me, and just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds like fun. Oh, all right. Well, you're like my new guru. I just, I love listening to you talk about this stuff, and I have gained so much just from this short conversation, and I know that my audience has as well. And I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I will continue to engage with you in all of the various capacities that I can online, with, you know, multiple thousands of miles between us from one coast to another. But your work is very important, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing it with us today. Your website is?
You can go to leahlamb.com. I've got 3 stories. I'm about to make them all one, so it will eventually just be leahlamb.com. But you can also learn about the upcoming course, Myth, Magic, and Medicine, on my medicinestories.com website.
Okay.
That starts in March. And then my speakthespark.com, which is the course that has guest teachers. Our next group of cohorts is going to be welcomed in April.
Fantastic. I will put all of that information in the show notes, Leah. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And I look forward to speaking with you again more.
Thank you. This was such a fun, so much pleasure getting to talk to you in such like a deeper conversation about story.
My favorite type of conversations. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.